Good morning, great games at your table. I'm Jonathan Albin, and this is Game Master's Guide. Today, we're going to be looking at the reality of role playing. When you have been at it for as long as I have, there are those points in time where it seems like you may have run the gamut. You may have run out of steam, and your players are concerned whether or not the story is going to become dull or uninteresting. And we're going to talk about how to keep that creativity flowing for every session and make your games outstanding. I'm Jonathan Albin, and if you haven't yet, make sure you click all the buttons down below to let the algorithm know that you're part of our community. And let's get to it.
Absorbing damage is the name of the game.
All right, if you are a game master, you know the drill. At some point when you're driving forward your story, you start to feel comfortable with the process. You have the right nuance in terms of establishing your shots. You're able to bring the players into the world as you define it, and you're giving them the opportunity to really grab a hold and take the story where they want to. The problem becomes when the players have reached the absolute peak of where they can take the story and instead find that they're being dragged down by the mundane, the sameness of it all. Yes, we have a framework that is a worldview and perhaps a villain who is steadfast and long-suffering and continually is a thorn in the side of the adventurers. But even with that, the story can become rote, routine, and you may find yourself in the situation where your players are looking for more. The question becomes, when do you change your course, and how do you go about making those course changes to keep the excitement level up and keep the players involved week over week, month after month, and in my case, year after year? The idea of a long tail story does demand some ebb and flow, some rising and falling action, and you have to find ways to make that work. So we're going to be talking about the particulars on how that can be attained. And I think you'll be really surprised, especially when you get near the end. There's going to be some real surprises in store for you. Well, as the saying goes, if you give somebody enough rope, they will find themselves hanging around. But the idea here is that the concept of a trope is a well-worn concept that the players feel familiar enough with that they continue to pursue those elements that make them achieve their goals. So the concept here is that if you're going to utilize the tropic mechanisms, it might do you well to consider how many different possible ones there are out there. Maybe the players are going to be satisfied with the one or two that you've been using, but the idea here is that you want to build out and utilize more, perhaps find variations on a theme that can work and find ways to push beyond it. Because the problem with a trope is that it becomes well-heeled, well-worn, and the players can find their direction through it to become, a well-worn path. And we want to make sure that we provide the players with the excitement they're looking for, and one of the ways you can avoid that, the problems of it, is to make sure that you keep your dynamics high speed and well oiled. So consider other tropes than those that you've been familiar with. Of course, ultimately, all tropes are things that are familiar and well identified, and so if you're looking for players to be really excited about being part of your game, find ways to operate on the outside of that tropic fence. Find ways to tell the story that are not within that framework. Now, we'll do an entire episode on this if you want, so make sure to let me know in the comments if you'd like to see an episode on the use of the care and feeding, the care and feeding of tropes, because they are useful but you need to make sure that you cultivate them so that the players won't feel the pressure to modify or change their play styles in order to accomplish whatever it is that your tropes are demanding of them. A second way that players will find themselves falling into a trap is that their game master, their storyteller, is soft selling. In other words, there is a part of drawing the players into a game experience that, well, it can be rough if you are in a situation where you have players who have been used to you providing them with guidance and feedback. The idea is that eventually they will become dependent upon it, and your soft soap will actually leaving, no pun intended, or actually pun intended, leaving a bad taste in their mouths, because they are now basically being spoon-fed. And so you want to instead find ways to avoid getting too trapped in providing them these extras. Recently we did a video on the concept of giving the players something new to chew on, and in particular it was the episode about the archives, the idea of gathering information through a form of exposition. And if you do exposition too often, the players become expectant of it, and they don't feel there's any way that they can gather that information through the agency. So check out that video. I'll put a link to it right here, one of these corners, and then you'll be able to follow that mechanism and therefore break away from the spoon feeding process. Most game masters try to avoid the idea of a railroad anyway, and a spoon-fed process is fundamentally an oversimplified railroad. Now, player expectation really comes down to the players engaging in their portion of the creative process. The players come into the game with intention, with hope, with processes they want to see advanced in the game, and therefore you need to find ways to placate that. But even in that, you can find yourself getting caught in routines and ruts. If you have a player, for example, that is always concerned with how much cash they have on hand, then you might fall into the pattern of always providing them with the treasures and awards that they're looking for. But when you do this, you are kind of cutting yourself short and taking out the opportunity for the players to really become a part of the story. And so you want to instead figure out ways to help the players to achieve what they're looking for, while not giving away the farm and falling into a pattern of just feeding their need. Now, the real hope, of course, is that they will appreciate the adventure that you're bringing forth to them, and you're providing them with the elements that they want to have to make the story move. And this is where the creativity of a storyteller, a game master, really plays in, because you are trying to develop an addictive feel to the adventure so that the players will be seeking the next episode and the next episode. We did a video also on the idea of developing cliffhangers and driving rising and falling actions, and I will endeavor to recreate that in particular in the next few weeks, because my older version of it's a little choppy and chunky. But the idea is that you want to be able to cause a rising and a falling of the action in your story so that your players don't feel like they have to constantly carry the load themselves. And so your adventure needs to be innovative, creative, and such. And this might be the part where you feel like you're getting trapped, you're getting stuck, because the idea of constantly being the resource is problematic, because you are, simply not giving yourself enough access to new concepts and ideas that you can bring to the game. Not only that, if you're running a game that has got 6 or 8 players and they are constantly pursuing those angles, they're going to be deriving their own pathways through it. And when you have made a decision that changes that course arbitrarily, or you're trying to find ways to innovate, the very process by which you do this can become problematic, because the players might decide that there's no longer a level of trust with your adventures and instead are starting to observe and investigate what you're giving them in ways that will allow them to really learn from your process and adapt to you. And so, yes, in the microcosm, it might feel like the players are using a fine-tooth comb to pursue the story, but the reality is that it's in that analysis that the players can develop new ideas and new direction, and you also can adapt to what they're doing and give yourself really that opportunity to excel in making the adventure outstanding, because now you're operating not only at a macroscopic level, but now you're also working at a microscopic level, picking up the nuances that the players are trying to gather from the game and giving them fundamentally what they want while getting what you want from it as well. Nonetheless, there's going to be times, and I've been GMing for 50 years, so I can tell you there have been entire swaths or swathes, however you say that, there are large portions of the campaign that can fall into this routine rut or stagnancy. And the reason that happens is that you as a game master become complacent, or you're busy with other parts of your life and the game is put on the back burner, and you have to keep churning out new material because your players want to play, but you fall into traps such as using modules or using somebody else's written material without doing the work of integrating that into your personal settings, your personal storyline. And so I don't want you to become discouraged. It's easy to become so because, well, you expect yourself to do better, and yet when you play session over session, you can feel it almost as much as the players can when the games aren't going smoothly. And so this is a cause for concern and a reason to look for more to put into your game. But don't take it as something that affects your psychology, because after all, you're an amazing person and a great storyteller. Otherwise, you wouldn't have people that are at your table. So once you know that, then you can actually start to give yourself permission to be really awesomely creative. And so we're going to talk about that next. And so here is the secret to being a great game master. You have to learn how to cope. And I capitalized the letters for a reason. Yes, you know how much I like my acronyms. We are going to be talking about each piece of this, but the idea of learning how to cope is literally to learn how to conceive of a story element or process, objectify it so that the players have something to grab a hold of and adjust, propagating that into your story piece by piece, element by element, and then experimenting with the outcome, because the players ultimately are the ones that are going to find the cope mechanism useful in the game. Now, the concept here of conceive is literally to come up with a new idea. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be completely single source. You don't have to be generating the idea altogether. Perhaps you are conceiving of a way to bring in a story element from another property that you're wanting to focus on during the game session, and therefore you are giving the players an opportunity to see a different side of the story. And as you do so, you are going to take those pieces that you want to include. Let's say, for example, you decide you want to include some form of mental ability, psychic phenomenon and such. Now, in the case of the world of Nikos, you simply can pick up a new system book and then play in a different theme and concept. But if you don't want to go that far and all you want to do is adjust and alter what you're already doing, then choose that concept, put it into terms that will make sense to your players and for the game world itself, and perhaps a new meteor or an asteroid has come by and presented to players the opportunity to pick up these new abilities. And therefore, you now have something completely innovative for the players to derive their actions from. And then you simply propagate, put it into the world, put it into play so that the players can grab a hold of it and chew on it and make their own courses with it. And by doing so, you therefore get the opportunity to experiment with it to find whether it's really a good fit or whether it's something that, is going to be a passing event and we're going to simply avoid it in the future. But it gives you an opportunity to really recharge your story in a way that you may not have before, whether that is include a new timeline, adjust the frequency of your villain encounters, or even determining new ways to create this adversity that the players really are clamoring for in your game that they haven't been getting because of the routines that you've fallen into. Ultimately, the issue is you want to develop a good, strong relationship with your players, and player faithfulness is a double-edged sword. You need to be able to be faithful to them by giving them a play experience that is exciting and thrilling and something they want to and yearn to be a part of. But at the same time, you need to develop an idea of the players as being faithful executors of the will that you're looking for, so that you are providing them with what they need to make the game exciting and fun. So when we look at this and we consider what we are going to do for our players, we need to realize that it's a two-way relationship, and the best we can hope for is a game session that's great enough for the players to dig into and want to be a part of. And that really causes the story to advance, pop, and be all the things that we want it to be. I do want to thank you for being here today. I'm Jonathan Albin. This has been Game Master's Guide. I hope we've been able to cover some of the topics that might be giving you trouble in your games. If there are subjects you'd like to bring up, feel free to leave those in the comments, because I'd love to have a conversation about what happens in your games. How do you change it up and keep things fresh? What kind of things do you look for in a game master, perhaps that you're not getting at your current tables? For more information on what we're doing and how the Nikos RPG mechanism might be able to be helpful to you, check out all the links down below, and we will see you in the next episode. As my grandfather would say, that's enough for now. Now go play.